There was an implied sense of danger around this film when that first trailer came out. The impending release of this film felt like a threat, and people had all these questions about it. What type of mirror is this going to hold up to our society? What political groups is this movie going to try and dunk on? Was it going to get too real? Too true to real life? And is this movie just a giant psyop to manifest a real life war? Those were all sort of questions people had. But I don't know. Call it mismanaged expectations or like complete mismarketing on A24's part, but the resulting film is so toothless in its commentary. It frequently goes out of its way to avoid real life comparisons. Starting first and foremost with the impossibility of the factions that are even at war, and the president, giving the most nebulous, like generalized speech ever put to film. It's going out of its way to avoid real life comparisons. And this movie was not the film that a lot of people thought it was going to be. And welcome to Theater and Stream, a film podcast. I am Matt, that is Chuck, and this is episode 41. Today we've got a really special one for you folks. A new Alex Garland film always brings the promise of heady ideas and apocalyptic circumstances, but the tone that his latest film looked to set was perhaps a little too politically dangerous, a little too close to real life for some people. But is it actually? We'll discuss that and more when we talk Civil War, the subject of today's featured review. We've also got a bit of news from the world of monolithic streamers. We've got a watch list that is packed to the gills. We have our mentionables that are going to close out the show. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and please check out what else we've got on the channel. It's been 3 weeks since we last convened, and in that time, we've put up a couple of mini-sodes. I've got one about all the so-called premium theatrical formats, such as IMAX, such as Dolby. What exactly are you paying extra for your ticket price, for your upcharge, and is it worth it? And then last week, Chuck released his mini-sode about modern toxic fandoms. So before we begin in earnest, Chuck, is there anything you wanted to say about that?
Just that I thought yours was very illuminating, because I remember, when the Grand opened up in Bismarck like 20 some years ago, and they were like, we have the biggest screen in the upper Midwest, and you're really taking that seriously. And then like being sold extreme screen by Marcus when I lived in Fargo, and to find out that it's all bullshit to some degree, and that it's like you really got to get into the granular details to understand what you're actually paying for. I appreciated it. I was educated. My mini, I guess, was a little bit more different than what we do typically. It's more video SEAE kind of a thing. And I don't know, like I'm not sure if I quite made my point as effectively as I wanted to, but yeah, there's just something weird. It's not just toxic fandoms, it's toxic creatives, it's toxic corporations, and just kind of it's the culture war bullshit, but it's trying to pin down why it's happening. And it's because we're all being molded and shaped like clay into what the modern audience is supposed to be. Because who knows, in 50 years, we could all be Mormon. And then what?
Yeah, and speaking of being shaped, our news story here is pretty, it's kind of in that same vein.
It sure is. And we have to couch this. I've done some additional research since I added this on to the document. And there's some kind of fake news coming out exactly about what Facebook and Netflix were doing. But there was this lawsuit that, is coming out where, like, I think it's like a former employee who is suing, and I can't remember if it's Netflix or Facebook, but either way, that's how we know this information, because there's an accusation within the filings of this court case where Netflix has been paying Facebook for access to an API. I couldn't tell you. I think it's like some kind of platform interface. And every website or app has one of these things, and they often do either provide it for free to developers, people who make sub apps for your app. Like if you use Reddit, you don't use them for a long time. You didn't use the actual Reddit app. You used a third-party product that just accessed the servers of Reddit to make their thing possible. But what Netflix was buying was access to a quote-unquote Titan API that gave them direct access to direct messages in the inboxes of customers, which up till now was something Facebook said they did not do. They'll sell your data. They'll send you up a river to any fucking body who will pay them for it, but we won't let them see your private messages. We'll censor them, but we won't let other people see them. And I think this kind of got blown out of proportion a bit, because I think people were, looking at this news and going, oh, well, they're seeing my dick pics, and that's not the case. They specifically are only kind of like trawling for data on people, Facebook users who are also Netflix subscribers, and then trying to connect some dots between how they recommend shows to each other, or they're trying to get an idea of what their tastes are to better shape Netflix's recommendation algorithms to better tailor their product to you as a customer. So I guess what did you do a lot of reading on this, or and what do you think about who's the bigger creep here? Is it Facebook for selling it or Netflix for buying it?
Well, I definitely think it's probably Netflix, because I think they're the grosser entity in this situation, because there's just something inherently nasty about the fact that I could be DMing my cousin about the hypothetical death of my grandma, and then a couple days later Netflix is like, hey, do you want to watch the Aquafina movie The Farewell about the death of her grandma, or something like that, and it's just there's something really gross about that. And yeah, from what I understand, the alleged sort of thing that's going on here is just sort of like a series of trading things back and forth, because essentially Facebook gives Netflix the access to these things like private messages and their friends list, and they're even their phone contacts, because if people when you open the Facebook Messenger app on your phone, especially when you first log into it, you get this series of prompts that are like, do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? And one of those things that pops up is, do you want to share your phone contacts with Facebook Messenger? And so always be sure to hit no on that option, because otherwise, Netflix is going to get your phone contacts in addition to your Facebook stuff. So essentially, Netflix uses all of this info to create better, more tailored ads. And then the sort of cycle of this is that every 2 weeks, Netflix prepares a report for Facebook on the effectiveness of said ads that they have created. So Facebook is like, okay, you can use our info to create these ads, but we want to know how effective this stuff is, because in turn we can use that info to make our ads better. And so it's just this cyclical thing. And yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I guess, I don't know, we shouldn't be surprised by any of this though, because if something is free, it's not actually free. You're paying for it with your information, and
you are the product. Ultimately,
yeah, you are the product,
yeah.
and your eyes getting on things on your screen, such as ads and stuff like that, that is the product. And so, yeah, this is definitely pretty nasty, but not something we should be surprised by. I mean, this stinks of the Cambridge Analytica stuff that happened, 7 or 8 years ago, or however long ago that was. And every time this happens, Facebook is just like, we're sorry. Not sorry that we did it. We're just sorry that we got caught, and then they just keep doing it. So,
well, yeah, because they have been doing this. Facebook, I mean, since actually 2012, the Obama administration and not the McCain campaign were given access to the Facebook API so that they could better target younger people, with advertising, for the presidential election that year. That was really what cracked it open, is, as far as a money-making venture with ulterior motives. But yeah, if they were going to do that for politically ideological reasons, you can bet that it's just going to be about, like, how do we make the bottom line better? They're always going to do it. And in some ways, this is probably just the tip of the iceberg of this kind of thing. Like, can you imagine what Facebook is selling to insurance companies and big pharma? It just, the possibilities are endless. Like, what they know about us is insane in the tech world. And I don't know. I've recommended the documentary "We Live in Public," many times, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and it just keeps on, freaking me out. What the implications of what that particular documentary had to say. But yeah, this is nothing new. We always knew this. This is kind of like finding out that our government's spying on us. But in this sense, it's like you can't trust anything these companies say. Whatever assurances you receive about their altruism and their commitment to protecting your privacy, it's bullshit. So use these platforms at your own risk. Don't be a baby. Understand what you've signed up for. And, that's why, we are just going to tune out from Netflix this week. And we're going to talk about WrestleMania, which was on Peacock. I didn't watch this myself, and you'll notice we aren't using any footage from it because I just don't want to draw the ire of the conglomerate that now operates that place. But was it fun? Do you watch wrestling typically, or are you just are you like an Easter Catholic? You're only showing Christmas and Easter. You watch WrestleMania and SummerSlam, and that's it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm a lapsed wrestling fan. I mean, my wrestling fandom goes all the way back to the Attitude Era, late 90s, early 2000s. And then I was kind of out, and I've been out for the longest time. And the only reason that I watched this is because it was on Peacock. Gone are the days of paying $60 on DirecTV, on demand. Now you just have to subscribe to Peacock, for $10 for the month, and you can watch this. So, I guess I gotta say right from the get-go that I think wrestling is mostly horrible now.
Oh no!
I find most of these wrestlers incredibly boring, and none of them have cool gimmicks or characters anymore. They're all just kind of the same big buff dudes that just come out, and there's no gimmicks. There's no cool characters. It's just the same dudes. And
well, I have to ask to that point, the guys on this poster that I put up there at the top there, are they related? Because they look like brothers. Are they brothers? Is that part of the narrative?
Well, that's funny because the Roman Reigns and The Rock are supposedly cousins. But the guys who are across from each other, they're not related in any way, even though they look very similar. And so The Rock and Roman Reigns are apparently from this same Pacific Islander wrestling dynasty family that has there are literally 5 or 6 of them that are in WWE. They're all from the same family, and so that's kind of one of the things that they were selling this year was this storyline. Roman Reigns has been the heavyweight champion for 3 years, and which is, I think, the third longest tenure for that in wrestling history. And so he did finally lose to Cody Rhodes, the guy in the lower left-hand corner there. And so that was pretty cool to see, I will say. But the other thing I was going to mention that I just really was surprised by, or I guess I shouldn't be surprised by it in the year 2024, but every inch of this thing is sponsored now, and it's so distracting. From the mat of the wrestling ring to the posts, every post says Slim Jim on it, and they're all LED. There's LED walls everywhere, and every inch of this thing is advertised now, and every single individual match is sponsored by a different company. Like,
Oh,
you know,
so this is like the
Fun-
UFC on steroids, because that's how they operate. But this sounds even worse.
yes, it's every individual match. So like one match will be sponsored by like C4 energy drinks, and then they'll change all of like the LED walls around the ring to like reflect that. So it's just like every inch of this thing is sponsored, and it's incredibly distracting. And um I guess the other thing too that this none of this stuff is probably new to like people who have been watching wrestling for the past 20 years. But I am so surprised by how sanitized it all is too. Like no more blood, no more swearing. Like despite the fact that this is on streaming, they still bleep out the swear words and stuff. So it's so weird and it's just incredibly sanitized. But yeah, that's the stuff I don't like. The stuff that I will say, I mean, I still think this was fun to watch in some ways. I think that the sort of message they were trying to send for like the whole shebang was Vince McMahon is finished. This is the new era of Triple H because if people don't know, Triple H is basically the new Vince McMahon. He runs everything now, the former wrestler, and so I think he's genuinely like a good at his job. He's an interesting creative lead, I think, and it seems like he genuinely cares about the business. And if anything, he seems like a little bashful nowadays, where he like doesn't want the camera on him anymore, and it's kind of funny to see. Like he avoids the camera like the plague, and yeah, I guess the other big reason that you watch WrestleMania is for all the surprise guest appearances. And so it was cool to see, The Rock come back and play the heel. And The Undertaker showed up for like literally 30 seconds during the last match. And that was cool to see. But yeah, I don't know. Overall, wrestling just really isn't for me anymore. They were, I don't know if the big like log line that everybody was running with the day after was this is the Avengers Endgame of wrestling. And so it was like that was kind of like the big thing of the night because it was the turning of a page basically. And so it was interesting to see it from that lens, I guess. But I have no plan on watching any, I'm not going to watch like the, Raw and like SmackDown now or anything like that. But it was interesting to watch from like the perspective of like an artifact, looking upon an artifact that you haven't seen in like 20 or 30 years. And the last thing I will say is I find Pat McAfee absolutely insufferable. And oh my God, like I don't have any experience with the guy. Like I don't watch ESPN really all that much or his show.
I liked him better when he was a YouTuber. Like
Yeah.
as soon as he got like the DraftKings money and then ESPN swooped in, like the ego is unbelievable and he is insufferable.
He is, yeah. He doesn't even have, because he was like a special guest commentator for the show, and he just doesn't have, I mean, the voice for it. He sounds like a middle-aged drunk uncle who's been smoking cigarettes for 30 years and downing Jack Daniels every night. Like he doesn't have the voice for it. He doesn't have the charisma for it. He's just his announcing is incredibly boring. And so yeah, please don't bring him back next year. If WWE, I'm calling you out, if you want any chance of Matt Miller watching WrestleMania next year, you don't bring back Pat McAfee. So
the man is perpetually like, a guy who is waking up after golfing all day, getting sunburned and drinking way too many Arnie Palmers and smoking too many cigarettes and stogies, and he's got his boys. I love the toxic table on his show, because they just are there to just say the most reprehensible shit possible. At least they used to do that, before ESPN came into the equation. And I always knew he did wrestling, but I never understood either why he was in it. But it's a self-promotion, getting the brand out there. And that's what WrestleMania is about now, obviously. It's like how do we sell Slim Jims without, just running an ad well, you just make the whole event the ad, and it's really gross. Yeah. And now we're going to move on from that to talk about how the people who brought us 2-day shipping have maybe possibly made the best video game adaptation ever. Like, is it like are people reacting positively to this Fallout series from Jonathan Nolan, and I forget who else is involved, but is this thing just being received so well because it's not dog shit like the Rings of Power or the Wheel of Time? Even like, there actually does seem to be some kind of reverence for the fandom and the source material here, like half the time, and then the other half of the time I'm just like, what? Why are we using a woman's water breaking for a gag in a Fallout show? So like at the top, that's where I'm at with it. But like, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I will say off the bat, I've seen 6 of the 8 episodes. I really, really enjoyed the pilot. I thought the pilot was like really interesting in its own sort of self-contained way, where, it was mostly taking place in the vault, and there was this sort of gonzo-ness to it. Like, just, it was very odd at times and weird, and just like all the stuff about like fucking your cousins, and
they
like
were so casual about cousin fucking.
Yeah, and like just all the jokes about like marrying off your daughter. Just, it had a weird, interesting feel that I was there for. And then I don't know, once episode 2 came along, it sort of settled into a more like directionless vibe, where it's like, okay, we're just going to have our characters walk from point A to point B, and there really is no direction to it. And then around episode 5, this sort of mystery comes to the forefront, which kind of has to do with the vaults and why they were created, and why the bombs dropped in the first place. And it's picked up a little bit more steam for me now that I'm sort of in the tail end of the show. But yeah, I don't know. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, where I think that with a lot of fandoms, if you show like reverence for the material, that'll get you pretty far. That'll get you, like, even if your show is absolute shit, if you show a Fallout fan a character jamming a stim pack into their body, that'll go far. And so I think that's kind of what's happening a bit here, is where people are just seeing the stuff, that is from the video games, and they're like, oh my God, that's so amazing. And so, but yeah, what about you? I want to make note, you had already kind of brought it up a bit, but you wrote in our doc here, this is basically the same thing as Wheel of Time. And I want to know what
do I mean
why
by that?
You say that.
Well, yeah. Just because in the pilot, you have like the brief introduction, and then you have a party, and then you have everyone at the party getting murdered in a comically gory fashion. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and there's some ways that they've chosen to portray the combat that just really bugged me. Like the random shots of the raider, like parkouring off of a picnic table, to then like very poorly slash, someone to death. Like that stuff, I was just like, ugh, like, why are we doing that? That's what I mean. That was like why I wrote it in there. After that, the pilot, it kind of does become its own thing, and it stopped reminding me of one of Amazon's failures, at adapting something, and because there was a moment during like Walton Goggins' big, show up in the Philly town, when he just like shows up and just starts murdering fucking everybody. Then there's this gunfight going on, and in the middle of the gunfight, he just like stops and just starts eating food, like he's a Fallout character, or like he, oh, I took a few hits, time to eat some food and get my health points up. And that's where I was like, oh my God, they're kind of trying to have fun with it, in that way, where it's like what is it like playing the game? What is, like trying to actually do that in a way that isn't just putting something in a first person perspective, looking at you, Halo and Doom, you know what I mean? So there was parts where I was like, okay, yeah, I get this. I kind of understand what you're doing. And but then I'm sorry for bringing up the word woke, but why are they respecting pronouns in this universe? It just doesn't.
In the apocalypse,
it doesn't make sense. It makes no sense. It makes even less sense that it would be the the Brotherhood of Steel doing it. And I just have to say this: that actor that in that role who like steps into the boot and gets their leg all cut up and can't be a a trainee, like under a squire. They can't be a squire anymore.
Yeah.
But what did you think of that individual's acting ability relative to everybody else in the show?
I don't know. I guess I didn't really notice it. I mean, I find all of the Brotherhood of Steel stuff actually pretty like boring because
it is.
It's sort of is created to be that way in the game. I mean, I don't know why they chose to do like a Brotherhood of Steel storyline for the show.
They shouldn't have, in my opinion.
Yeah, they shouldn't have. Because, I mean, if people don't know, the Brotherhood of Steel in the video game are basically like the lawful good, like boring ass faction. Just like the clean cut, like absolutely, for the greater good. I mean, there's nothing really that interesting about them other than the fact that they wear power armor. And I think that's the only reason they're here is because the power armor looks cool. And so, yeah, they should have, if anything, been like the faceless bad guys of the show, maybe, rather than trying to do like a Brotherhood of Steel storyline. But yeah, I agree with you there. The Brotherhood of Steel stuff doesn't really work for me. And thankfully, they kind of pivot away from that in the latter half of the show where, what's his name? Titus, he becomes less entwined with the Brotherhood of Steel as the show goes on.
He becomes his own man. Because if I'm honest now, because then I was thinking about this as I watched it more, this has more in common with the Star Wars sequel trilogy in that way. Because you have, white girl protagonist who's, Mary Sueing around the wasteland. You have this African-American character who, wants to become like a Jedi, wants to become a knight. There was just a lot of tropey stuff going on here that I've seen a time or two before. Don't touch that, honey. And it really bugged me after a while because I was like, I can predict exactly how every scene is going to go when I see that character now.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. The one thing I do before we move off this show, the one thing I do want to bring up is one thing I find absolutely hilarious is, we had talked at the very beginning about like the, doing right by the fans of like the games and stuff. And there is like I don't know, have you seen any of the stuff about like New Vegas fans in this show?
I was gonna bring that up, dude, because like I haven't gotten there yet, but I've seen the discourse about how this is Todd Howard's revenge against Black Isle and Obsidian. Like this was his final fuck you to those people because now it's all retconned. There's even stuff from Fallout 1 and 2 that are retconned.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's sort of the everlasting debate that's never going to be solved online. But yeah, basically, if people don't know, it's not even a scene in the show. It's literally like a picture over one of the end credits for the episode that essentially shows that New Vegas isn't a thing anymore. It's like destroyed.
It got nuked or something. Yeah.
Yeah, people are just running with that. And
and not only that, Shady Sands and the NCR are just not factors. So like all that connective tissue from the first two games and its unofficial Fallout 3 successor, like the true Fallout 3 is New Vegas. If you're one of those purists. And that whole trilogy has now just been like, oh, no, you're non-factors. It's all Bethesda from here on out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I find that stuff all really funny. I think there's a little bit of, I guess they have a legitimate complaint in some aspects, but I think a little bit. You were never gonna please some people, and I think that there's a little bit of that going on too. And so, I just find that whole conversation really, really funny because I mean, the most interesting thing about this show to me is that it is the furthest thing in the timeline for this series, in this whole series of games and or shows or anything. And so I'm in some ways I'm so thankful for that, because everybody nowadays is just like, we're going to do a prequel, or we're going to do a show that takes place in the in between time between these two games. And it's like, just do a sequel. I want to know what happens after everything. I want to know what happens after the latest video game. And so I like it in that way, because it's actually pushing the timeline out further.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's not just in video games. Like Star Wars is perpetually stuck in that rut between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy right now. And now it's time to move on to yet another movie starring Juliette Binoche, where she makes a man bricked up with food. Because from what I understand, that's what The Taste of Things is about.
Yeah, this is a movie that I rented this past week, and this is basically a movie in which a man and a woman make food, and they, talk about philosophy and food, and that's pretty much it. And I found this movie absolutely incredible. I'll say that from the get-go. This is one of those films that is like manna for the weary soul, where it's like you watch this and you are just like, it's sort of one of those like life reassuring movies. And I just wanted you to imagine like I put it in our doc, but a whole movie of the final scenes of Babette's Feast, where people are just, like making food and just like talking about, philosophy and food. And the whole idea is basically, Juliette Binoche is like a live-in maid for this rich chef. But at the same time, even though she is his maid, they have basically fallen in love, and they have a romantic relationship, and they just make food all day together. And his friends come over, like his aristocratic friends come over, and they sit around the fire and smoke cigars and eat food and just like talk about like philosophy and their thoughts about, how food fits into their lives. And it's really, really well written and really well composed. It's barely over like an hour and 40 minutes, and it gets in, it gets out. And I really, really loved this a lot. And this again, another movie from last year that probably would have made my top of the year last year. But the one thing I do want to touch on is I really love this trend that we've been seeing lately of directors who go, they're foreign directors that go into other countries and make movies within those cultures, because we're seeing this a lot with Arthur Harari, who did both the movie last year about the Japanese soldier who was in the jungle, and then the God, what is it called? I'm blanking on the name now, but the movie about the woman who killed her husband, or from last year,
Anatomy of a Fall. Yeah,
Anatomy of a Fall. Yeah, just completely blanked on that. But yeah, so he did that. He's a Frenchman who went into Japan and researched all this stuff and did all this stuff. And then, I mean, there have been other directors who have done this recently, like Wim Wenders did that recently. His most recent film, he went to Japan, and then it even goes back. You can go back as far as like Gareth Evans, who went into Indonesia and is just like, I'm going to make these martial arts films. And so, yeah, I really, really like that trend. I think it provides an interesting perspective on these different cultures. And so, yeah, I really, really enjoyed this, and I don't need to say much more. But yeah, do seek it out.
On my radar, and I'm glad you kind of pointed that out, because I had noticed that myself, that there was just a lot of that going on more recently, and we should be very happy for that. Okay, I have a little girl whispering my name, and I just have to look at her. But in speaking of movies that probably would have been on a top 10 list if it had been available at the time, Zone of Interest is part of A24's deal with Max. You can now watch it there. And Angie had been like almost pulling the trigger on spending $20 to rent this for a while. And we finally got to watch it. And it wasn't quite the movie she was expecting. Because online, like TikTok, like movie chat, like profiles, were almost implying a supernatural element that wasn't there, obviously, because this is such a realist approach, to it. But this movie obviously made waves at the Oscars. It won Best Foreign Film. It won Foreign Language Film. It won for sound design. What did you make of the sonic oral soundscape of this movie?
Oh yeah, I thought it was awesome. This movie is so like it gives you such a gross feeling while you're watching it, like the whole time, because yeah, as you alluded to, there's all these sounds going on in the background, and it's everything from the stuff that is actually going on in the camps to these sounds of like a constant motorcycle engine revving. And I don't know if you picked up on that, but it's basically that was an actual thing taken from history where the officer that this movie was based on, he paid a guy to just sit and rev a motorcycle so that it would cover up the sounds of the concentration camp. And that is reflected in this film where, you have all these sounds going on in the background. And so the movie did win, among other things, it did win that best sound design Oscar, which it totally is worthy of. And so, yeah, what did you make of it?
Like that discomforting feeling was real.
Yeah.
Like this was a rare movie where like we pressed play and I didn't pick up my phone once. I was so engrossed in it. And like they would have shot in the actual house that the real people lived in if it like wasn't like currently a residence for somebody, I think was the problem. It had been updated too much. So they went like a block away and used a house a block away from the actual one. But I the way that it made it so insular, it put the blinders on, like when they're casually just like picking through like undergarments at the kitchen table, and they're just so, it's just an everyday thing. The boy playing with his collection of teeth, like what do you like? And yeah, like there's so much that like isn't shown or isn't directly said. Well, that's cool, but definitely implied. Like because otherwise there's not a lot that happens in this. It's so basic. It's very sparse. But the turning point for me, like the moment where it's like it makes you they really left me wondering what was actually going on, was with the mother of Hedwig when she comes for a visit and is just kept up at night because her room is literally glowing red like Kramer's apartment in Seinfeld when the chicken shack opens up next door from all the fires burning like literally in the across that wall. And like, did you think that she was just kind of like realizing what was actually going on there and just couldn't stomach it and just got the fuck out? Like how?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. She realized what was going on, and she just had to peace out because she couldn't deal with it, and she left her note, and so yeah, I think that is most certainly what was happening there.
And what do you make of the weird like design and aesthetic choices for like editing and like the titles and everything like that? I just didn't understand how it fit, like that in particular, like the way that it made the glow like bleed out. Angie went, "Are my glasses dirty?" And I was like, "No, that's the movie. Just roll with it." Like it seemed strange but for a Holocaust movie, an Oscar baiting Holocaust movie, but I guess not for a Jonathan Glazer movie. Like, and where do you think this fits within his very sparse oeuvre? Like, is this, is it up to his level, would you say?
I think so. I mean, I think that, it's definitely probably his most, unrewatchable movie. Like, this is not something I will probably ever rewatch but that doesn't mean it's bad. I think that, it's it's just something you really need to experience once, and then you sort of get everything that you need to out of it. And in that way, I want to talk about the ending,
Yeah.
because I think that that will make or break this movie for you. That is sort of the thing that everybody is torn on. That is the thing that some people hate, some people love. And here was kind of, I guess I'll tell you my process as to what was going on in my mind when sort of the final 5-10 minutes of the movie were going on. So what happens is the movie suddenly transitions to footage of like a modern day Holocaust like museum.
I think
And
it's actually the Auschwitz Museum.
is it Auschwitz? Okay, yeah. And there's it's just sort of like a everyday, janitorial staff are like vacuuming, and it's just showing the museum.
Dusting the ovens. It's a daily task to dust the ovens at the Auschwitz Museum. And I that was a horrifying thing to kind of comprehend.
And so when that first happened, I was like, "Oh my God, what are we doing? Please don't do this," because it sort of reeked of me like a move that like Spielberg would have done, where he's like, "Okay, I'm gonna end my movie by showing this completely like contextless footage of just a Holocaust museum just because." But then I immediately did a 180 on it, because he went back to the actual movie for a little bit. And so, in my opinion, what was going on there, this is my whole theory on the ending. It's basically that the officer, he's walking down the stairs, and he's trying to make himself throw up because he wants to see if he can sort of have the humanity. And so he's like, ugh, but nothing's coming out. And then he gets to the bottom of the stairs, and suddenly the camera looks down the hallway, and it sort of slowly zooms in on this peephole in the door. And essentially what is happening there is it's him sort of seeing the future, him envisioning what is going to be the result of his actions. He sees the future, and then it shows all the museum footage, and then it goes back to him. And so it's obviously his vision of the future. And so when that happened, I did a complete 180, and I was like, okay, I'm on board. This makes sense. I am totally on board for this,
And it causes me to want to try and, nail something down on that. Is he seeing the future that came to pass, or is he seeing a future where in like the year 2024 in in Nazi world, when they're victorious, like, which is he seeing? Is he seeing defeat, or is he seeing victory? Is that the Auschwitz Museum, commemorating the great work they did to purify the human race, or is it the Holocaust Museum as we know it?
I think has to. I mean, because of the thing that happens immediately before, of him trying to, make himself vomit, make himself try and feel something, some sort of remorse. I think it's him sort of, in a way, succeeding at that, where he is peering into the future and realizing,
okay,
what are going to be the result of his actions. And it's him sort of at least being able to acknowledge that, but it's not really getting through to him, because nothing comes of it. He's still, we don't see what happens after that. That is literally the end shot of the movie. And so we don't see what he did after those scenes, but I think it's just sort of him acknowledging what is going to happen, but then continuing to, be evil, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, because throughout the movie, there's images that I'm gonna remember, like the guy washing the blood off his boots. Like that messed me up for some reason, just because it's like the most tangible, visualization of the horror and the gore that's going on, more than likely. But it was an arresting experience, and I may watch it again, just because it kept my attention so well, and I want to kind of mine why a little bit. But I do want to say, though, this made me just want to sit back and watch the the BBC movie Conspiracy, starring Brana and Stanley Tucci. Have you ever seen that?
I haven't. No.
It's really good. It's about the conference where, and I think the male lead in this, that Haas Rudolph, is at the table in real life. Like his real life counterpart is at this conference in Swansea, Germany, where they basically said, "All right, we're going to kill all the Jews. This is how we're going to do it." And you see all of the reactions. You see the people who are just like totally committed. They're like, how soon can we fucking start? It sucks so much having to shoot these people in the head en masse. Can't we just burn them alive? You know, like, can't we find a more efficient way of doing this? And then you have the other people who are like, holy fuck, I'm physically ill about what we're talking about. Can we find something else? And it's just not possible. And so that's worth seeking out. If you want like a really depressing double feature that at the same time illuminates the Nazi mindscape, you know, those two make a great companion, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I'll have to seek that out. Yeah, definitely need to check that out. And, you know, this movie also proves, I mean, before this movie, when this movie was first announced, I mean, I have all the faith in Jonathan Glazer. He has never steered us wrong. But when this movie was first announced, it was kind of like, are you really going to do a Holocaust movie? Like, what else could you possibly say about the Holocaust? What else could you possibly contribute? And there's clearly more to mine from this subject, as he proved with this film.
Oh yeah. No, like he definitely dodged a bullet. Because like there are people who I think are kind of like, we look at the blurbs, I don't know, the people who write film criticism these days are just, they're just slobbering on some of these. And yeah, this is great filmmaking and everything, but there's certain parts of it where I am scratching my head going, why? Like all of the infrared, photography sequences showing that Jewish girl like hiding apples. I'm like, what did that contribute? Yeah, that stuff I think is maybe why there's this misconception amongst like the YouTube like real community sort of film content generation, where they're like, oh, there's something spooky going on here, and it's like, what are you talking about? And I wonder about that. Yeah, because in the actual novel this is based on, there's this whole like subplot about affairs, and one of the main protagonists, or like at least like main characters, is a like Jewish laborer. So like there's a lot that got cut out, kind of like with his adaptation of Under the Skin. There's a lot from that book that didn't make it into the movie. The aliens were Canaan in nature, and I'm not sure how relevant that was to it, which is why we just got black-skinned lady instead. But time to move,
seek it out. Definitely
watch it,
especially now that it's on Max. Like anyone can watch it, and so do go watch it.
And if you want to see what true fascism looks like, watch Zone of Interest. If you want to see a surface level neoliberal perception of what it will manifest as today, you should watch the main film that we're going to talk about. It's in theaters right now. Alex Garland's not final film. What do you take us away, Matt?
Yeah, so, oh man, this movie, where to start? I guess I'll start with when the first trailer came out, because there was an implied sense of danger around this film when that first trailer came out. The impending release of this film felt like a threat, and people had all these questions about it. What type of mirror is this going to hold up to our society? What political groups is this movie going to try and dunk on? Was it going to get too real, too true to real life? And is this movie just a giant psyop to manifest a real life war? Those were all sort of questions people had. But I don't know. Call it mismanaged expectations or like complete mismarketing on A24's part. But the resulting film is so toothless in its commentary. It frequently goes out of its way to avoid real life comparisons. Starting first and foremost with the impossibility of the factions that are even at war. And the president, giving the most nebulous, like generalized speech ever put to film. It's going out of its way to avoid real life comparisons. And this movie was not the film that a lot of people thought it was going to be. And I think that stepping on too many toes politically would have limited the ticket sales for this, which is the most expensive film that A24 has ever made. And this is a movie that must make its money back. It is not an option for it to do bad. And so it sort of failed in that way. And when the writing does go out of its way to parallel our world, it's often like completely eye roll inducing, like just stupid little name drops like Antifa and Charlottesville, and for no other reason than to just be like, hey, here's an Easter egg for our real world. But the actual film has more in common with like Children of Men than trying to be like the Red Dawn of our present time. It's sort of a near future road movie, and it's focused on characters going from point A to point B as they intersect with various factions, both friend and enemy. And if you're really, really desperate for a movie that has anything substantive to say about any sort of subject, Garland has basically like Trojan horsed his feelings on war journalism into the film, like something that nobody expected when the trailers first came out. So, like, specifically, this movie has a lot to say about the profession of war journalism and the toll that it takes on its practitioners. But, I mean, not much more than that, really. And so, I don't know. That's a good place to start, I think, do you think this movie was sort of sold audiences a false bill of goods? Because I think it was certainly mismarketed, and it promised a politically divisive film, which it is not. And it also promised, like, in some, corners of TV, it promised like the action film event of the year. You should have seen the trailers that they were showing during WrestleMania for this movie.
It will be playing shortly in this reel. Yeah.
It's wild because it marketed this film as like a action movie with a ton of gun porn and like gun cocking sound effects and explosions, and oh my god, I could not handle it. But yeah, I'll leave it there. I've said enough for now. What about you, Chuck?
Well, before we actually talk about the movie itself, I think we do kind of just got to get all the junk out of the way, because I'm a lot more aligned with the Alonso Duraldis of the world, about regarding the how you describe it as toothless, and that's because it doesn't take a stand on anything explicitly, even though it clearly does have a perspective. If they had made the evil third-term president Mahershala Ali instead of Nick Offerman, I would take it more seriously. But they made this guy look a certain way. They didn't tell you what party he was in. But let's be real. In today's age, what is the guy with a blonde mop top? Which political party, the white man, which party do you think he's going to belong to? And the nebulous...
He had the red tie.
Yeah, and a red tie.
The red tie.
Yeah, he did have a black, chief of staff who gets fucking executed. And I guess that's my problem with the lack of context. It's like you're quote unquote being objective and being a fence sitter. He's kind of adopting the same moral ambiguity and nebulousness that war photographers utilize so that they can be placed in the places they need to place with. Whoever is not going to fucking kill you is going to be your friend, basically. And if you are embedded with a certain group, you are going to adopt their point of view. But we're not told why we should have it. They bring up like the president in this movie is, spoiler alert, murdered, probably with great prejudice, much like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein. And we know and there's no like rationalization for why they're so cold and heartless about it. Like if this is all about America and justice in the American way, then this guy should be tried and then drawn and quartered, after he's been found guilty. Instead, they fucking kill him. So, like, was he raping people en masse? Did he have, like, a whole cadre of, evil people, like little Berias in the Soviet Union running around raping and murdering people? Yeah. And he did the thing that certain politicians always bandy about. He dropped missiles and bombs on American citizens from jets, which is something that's invoked a lot, by politicians for some reason, because they feel like they often fantasize about doing it. So obviously he's a sociopath, but we know nothing about what led up to any of the events in this. We don't understand why anyone is aligned. It's not even clear which militias, are what. Like what separates the crew they were with who were clearing that business complex versus the one that Jesse Plemons is liquidating a town and making a mass grave. Like what is actually, what about, these proceedings, is anchored in something that's comprehensible, and it's kept deliberately vague and basic so that we can just move from thing to thing to thing without thinking about any of it. And you compare it to Children of Men, yeah, that certainly is there, but there's no urgency. It's so casual in its approach, and you don't understand the motivations behind a lot of the exterior characters. And instead of like painting a picture and helping us, get a peek into a world and, see how it might be similar to ours or be quite different from ours, we're just along for a ride, and we have no bearings for why the ride is happening. Like the bumps in the road just are bumps in the road. And our characters do nothing to influence the events. And I know that they're not supposed to, because they're just supposed to be war journalists. I can't fix this for you right now, honey. Well, I'll help you in a little bit. Why don't you go do something else with your Play-Doh? Sorry.
Sorry.
But yeah, that really bugged me, because there's a lot of people being like, "Oh, it's so awesome how it doesn't take a side." It's disingenuous. It does take a side. And then the result is a film that has no bite, and it doesn't really deliver any punch. He pulls every fucking punch he could pull. Like if you wanted to have, if he wants to hide the perspective to a degree. And yeah, because like, what are you supposed to be reveling in at the end? Like what kind of feeling did you have when it was all over and that photo of the execution is slowly developing over the end credits? Like where did that leave you?
I don't know. I mean, I guess at that point, I felt, as I was sitting there in my theater chair, I was sort of had the feeling of being duped, as I sort of alluded to, where it's like, this is not the movie that was promised. This is not the movie that was being sold. And I was trying to meet the film sort of on its terms at that point. And so, what this movie is actually about, secretly, what Garland is actually, as I said, trying to Trojan horse into this film that was supposed to be like this giant political like event is his thoughts
they're
on
fucking launching that's a priceless American artifact on screen right there, and you're just gonna shoot a fucking missile at it to kill one guy?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Well, it's like it's yeah, I mean, like I said, it's just, this movie is secretly about journalists and about his thoughts on, world journalists, and he clearly has a lot of reverence for them. And so I don't know, I really I struggle with the idea sometimes that, should we criticize the movie that we actually got, or should we criticize the movie for what we didn't get, or the movie that we would have rather had, or the movie that we would have rather done? And I'm conflicted as to whether or not, that it's valid to criticize something and just be like, well, I would have done this, or if I was the director, I would have done this instead of the movie that we actually got. And so I don't have really the answers when it comes to that, but what do you think? What do you make of what the movie actually did have to say about like journalists, about journalism, as far as specifically with the arc that Kirsten Dunst's character went on, and then also the arc that her sort of fangirl went on too. Jessie, I think was her name.
I know you say that he was trying to be referential to them, but
Mhm.
I really think this was an indictment of that aspect of the profession. You know, because
Mm.
I can relate to just kind of feeling like, because I'm a small town reporter, and like, and the closest thing I have to what they're experiencing in this movie is being on the battleground of whether or not two elementary schools are going to close, and feeling kind of like a voyeur, not only to the kind of like emotional suffering that some people are experiencing and the very real world consequences of civic decisions like that, but like because ultimately I don't know, I didn't like any of these characters. They all
Mm.
kind of felt a little repulsive to me. The just how they're just having fun. It's good. It's basically, oh, this is great content. We're gonna go get
Yeah.
the interview. It's gonna be so cool, and I don't know, like it doesn't like I don't it like that the sequence where like after they clear the loyalist soldiers from that high rise, and you just see God, what's his name? I have to look at the cast list here. Yeah, Wagner Moura, when he's just like, oh dude, ha ha, like just like shooting the shit with like one of those soldiers. I don't know, it was like, yeah, one of the militiamen. It just made me feel gross. Because like
Mhm.
if I were in his shoes, I would not be able to. If you're genuinely being objective, like these people are acting like they are, then you would not be reveling,
Mhm.
after that event. And so like I found him repulsive. I found Kirsten Dunst's character a little less so because she was at least honest.
Mhm.
Especially like as she progresses towards the end, like that, like you kind of called it out, the moment where she deletes the photo of Sam, dead. Like that was that's obviously a turning point for her, and it should
Mhm.
be. So, but yeah, even at the end, in her final moments, which are captured, shutter speed, like, and then just the way that because I did enjoy how like during the action sequences, we would have the stuff being shot for film, and then you'd have like like what's the snapshot look like, and
Yeah.
and that like and that is pretty cool. I can understand wanting to be there for moments like that, to be like in the room when all the shit is going down. But don't be a fucking dummy and run out into the middle of a hallway in a firefight. Like, she deserved to die, Kirsten Dunst. Let her die. That's the ultimate
Mhm.
lesson you could teach her instead of sacrificing your life for her so she can get the photo that you traveled across the country to get.
Mhm. Oh yeah, yeah. It's, I mean, the journeys that like her Dunst character and Jesse they go on. I mean, they're sort of opposites in each other. Where the first scene that we see of Dunst is her in that hotel room, and she's pointing the camera at the TV, almost like subconsciously, where it's just like something that she just does by habit. And then over the course of the film, she sort of, I think what's happening to her is she's sort of, I mean, she pretty much outright says it when her and Sammy are having a conversation when they're sitting on that couch that one night watching like the missiles being shot in the distance, and she says basically, like, I would have hoped that all these war zones I've covered in other countries would have stopped a conflict like those happening in the US. And it clearly her work, her life hasn't had the impact that she had hoped.
Mm.
And that's kind of the start of her journey. And then also, like, she, yeah, like you said, she deletes the photo of the dead Sammy, and that's her turning point. And she sort of drops her detachment at that point because she can barely lift the camera in during some of those Washington D.C. scenes. She's like having a full mental break during
Mm-hmm.
that sequence. And then, her final moments, she's basically reduced to having her death frozen in time, becoming one of her subjects. And in an interesting way, Jesse's journey is sort of going the opposite direction of hers, where Jesse now, she goes from the girl who's crying at the beginning and like throwing up in her lap to she becomes Dunst's character. She's gonna get the shot no matter what. She's gonna become famous for the shot of the dead president, and she now is Dunst character. She has, grown the shell of detachment. And so I thought it was kind of interesting in that way. That, he did have something to say, I guess.
Yeah,
And
but he critically ignored. And I know, but this isn't. I don't know. If you're gonna have integrity, you have to have some conversation, some line about the media's own role in sowing division. But the division wasn't the division that leads to a civil war was not the concern here, and that's fine, I guess. But don't act like the press are saints, please. Even though I guess he doesn't, but I don't know. Like, I find most journalists to be very self-righteous and elitist and egotistical and self-serving often. And primarily, a lot of them are ideologically driven. And that's something I try not to do as much as I can. I try not to let it seep into what we do here, even though I'm obviously failing to a degree here because I'm triggered by so much of the stuff that is in this movie. But it's kind of half baked. It needed more time in the oven. It needed to be a little bit more considered about the actual flow of things, because they just have a destination in mind, and they have roadblocks in their way, but there's the ticking clock is all but ignored. They just eventually show up somewhere, and it's like, oh, I guess we're too late. I guess we're just gonna hop on, behind some Humvees and see what happens. And it became a lot less interesting once that happened. If their goal had been to, if the movie had stayed committed to them getting to the president before the Huns, are at the gates, that could have been that could have worked a little bit more. But then they wouldn't have that final set piece sequence. And he didn't have the balls to do a one-shot sequence. Everything was pretty snappy as far as editing goes. And maybe that would have anchored me a little bit more, as just, kind of being trapped in the moments with the characters. And just one last little, snipe I'll make, to support your notion that we were sold a false bill of goods here. This scene with Jesse Plemons, it completely was misdirection. And the final, this guy's just a xenophobe? Oh, a North Carolina xenophobe. Who would have thought? You know what I mean? They missed out on all the nuance and the stuff that, as we recall, when we first saw the trailer for it, that's what excited me, was that notion. It's how many different factions and weird little subgroups are we going to have to contend with? But we don't care about who's actually aligned with who and why. This guy is on whose orders are they digging a mass grave and filling it with bodies? Why is that happening?
Yeah, it just seems like they're sort of doing it. And I think that's probably a good point now to transition to, the biggest sort of dividing line in this movie between people who like it and people who don't is, if this film should have done more world building. And it starts with that. I'm sure you've seen the sort of graph that's been going around of what the United States looks like in this world, as in what the different factions are. And in that graph, there are actually 4 different factions. There's the two that are the two that are most talked about in the actual film, the WF, and then the I don't know what is the other one called, the Allied States or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you wouldn't even know this by just watching the movie, but there are actually 2 other factions. The US is divided up into 4. And so that is sort of, the failing again of this movie, in my opinion, and I think of yours also, that there is zero world building, and it's to the detriment of the film because you have no idea why half the stuff is happening, whose side different people are even on. The one scene that I think works without that stuff is the sniper scene.
Yeah.
And the only reason that works is because that's the point of that scene, because they happen along these snipers that are trying to get this guy in a house, and they say, who's giving you the orders? And the sniper's like, nobody. We're trying to kill this guy and he's trying to kill us. And so that's the one scene in the film where that actually works, but everything else doesn't, because you have no idea why anything is happening. So yeah, what about from that perspective? What do you think of that?
No, that I think you kind of articulated it, perfectly, because and maybe he's trying to talk directly to us, through that scene, to just kind of be like, just accept it. And maybe I could, because that's the thing. It's not that I didn't necessarily like this, because I enjoyed it. For the most part, it's a fresh new movie. How could I not enjoy it? But it left me whelmed in the same way Men did, where it wasn't quite what I expected. Yeah, but it still had something that, kind of worked about it, but then it's just a big globby mess by the end, because there's nothing coherent about how you arrive where you arrive, which is the, opposite of his first two movies. Like, he really got lost somewhere along the lines creatively, and he just doesn't quite have the ability to bring it all home in the way that, Garland, that he did with Ex Machina, and I would say even with Annihilation. But as far as maybe something that works, something similar to that, I don't know. Like, because I kept on running into scenes where there was just a big black hole that would, that would help me follow it where it was going, and to use like a three-body problem reference, they're using the space travel that leaves negative space behind it, so no light or sound or any information can go in or go out of it. He's basically like cutting off his audience from being able to follow him with these creative decisions. And yeah, we're all still sitting here, still watching the movie, but we're not along for the ride after a while. And I was just kind of waiting for like, how are you going to end it? And that ending did not pack the punch I expected it to. I thought it would be a little bit more, like, because like I didn't even really catch what was his final statement. The president, what did he say at the end?
Oh, he just said, yeah, I mean, you're definitely right on that, because it was supposed to be like the badass final line. Basically, Wagner Moore's character goes to him for the quote, and then he says, please don't let them kill me. And then Wagner Moura says, that'll do. And then they shoot him. And so, yeah, it was clearly supposed to be this badass final line, but yeah, it did not pack the punch at all. Because I think, I mean, at that point, Wagner Moura he didn't really get this point across. Garland didn't get this point across very clearly either. But I think at that point, Wagner Moura's character was supposed to be so pissed off that he just didn't even give a shit anymore, because he clearly, I mean, the whole reason he went there was to interview the president, and not only does he not interview the president, but he barely gets a quote from him, and he's just like, shut the door. He's basically just like, that'll do, that's it. And so, yeah, it wasn't communicated effectively, and it wasn't nearly as badass as Garland thought it was.
And I think it betrays the fact that, yeah, like they are not these quote unquote objective, impassive observers to history. Mm-hmm. They are like actively involved in rooting on what's going on, mm-hmm. and I don't think he actually sees the characters as doing that, because that's what I mean. Like this movie does have a perspective, but it doesn't tell us why it has its perspective. We don't know why this guy was worth, killing like an animal, killing him like a dog. Like, why did it get to there? And I don't know, maybe we need like a TV series based in this universe that tells that story. I'd be more interested in that, because this is the series finale rather, to a TV show that isn't made. There's a lot happening that we should know about. It's like getting one chapter of World War Z, from the end of the book, and not having the context that brought you there. But that said, if this pops up on streaming in a few months, you should probably watch it. But whether or not you should take any deep lessons about the world we live in, you probably shouldn't. It's
Yeah,
it's
certainly.
not as heady as it's being sold as, nor is it as like competent as an action movie as people are making it out to be either. I don't know, I was left a little whelmed. But regardless, how is this guy going to right his ship now that he has, because he is going to direct again, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, uh, I don't even barely want to touch on this, but basically,
Because that was
in the last,
that was the big discourse leading up to this. It's like, because when Men came out, he basically said, "Yeah, that's my last one."
yeah, it basically like this quote was going around about 2 weeks ago, leading up to this film, that this was he was basically done directing, and he has since come out and said that is false and that he was misquoted, and so he is most certainly going to direct again. But in the meantime, his next project is actually writing 28 years later, the sequel to both 28 weeks later and 28 days later, with Danny Boyle coming back to direct. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know
Is
how
Danny
I feel
Boyle
about
actually
that.
coming back? Because I heard that like another individual was going to be doing it.
Well, what they're doing is they're actually going to do a new trilogy, from what I understand.
Oh,
And Danny Boyle is going to come back for the first one, which is 28 years later. And so, yeah, I don't know. I feel in some ways I like Danny Boyle, especially his older stuff. I think
oh,
become he's become less interesting as his career has gone on. But do you have the feeling that Alex Garland has sort of moved, like, for lack of a better phrase, artistically beyond Danny Boyle? Like he has sort of superseded Danny Boyle's ability in some ways. I That's sort of the feeling I get.
oh yeah. Like when you up until Men, like Civil War is a better movie than Men. I would say it
Mhm.
succeeds a lot more. No matter how much we've slagged it, I'd rather watch Civil War again than Men. But
Yeah.
before that, like after Devs came out, it was just like, oh god, what can't this dude do? And like the possibilities are endless. Everything he does is so provoking, and that used to be something you could say about Danny Boyle. But once that dude got an Oscar in his hand, he just fucking checked out. And I
Yeah.
haven't like I guess 127 hours was cool, but I can't remember a good Danny Boyle movie after that.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, he's definitely veered more into the lane of just kind of generic dramedies, because he's the one who directed that Beatles movie Yesterday.
Yeah, when he goes to an
And
alternate
so,
universe, that's right.
yeah, and so I don't know. He has definitely fallen off a bit. But that said, I will totally watch another entry in the 28 series of movies, because I mean 28 days later is incredible, and I think 28 weeks later is definitely underrated in my opinion. And so yeah, I will definitely watch another entry in that series. But I think more interesting than that, I don't know if you saw this, but another thing that Garland is working on is another war movie that is
Yeah.
currently titled just Warfare, and he's actually co-directing and co-writing it with a guy named Ray Mendoza, who is a like military technical advisor to Hollywood.
Okay.
And this is his first writing project, I believe, and his first directing project. So he's sort of one of those, like, he's kind of like the John Wick guys, in the sense that his sort of pipeline to becoming a creative is kind of being on the more technical side of things. So
That
that'll be interesting.
that will be interesting. And
Mhm.
I guess yeah, one more thing to look forward to from him. That yeah,
Yeah.
because I didn't realize just back to 28 years later, it's Nia
Yeah.
DaCosta who's going to be doing it, the second part in the trilogy. So
Okay.
that should be cool.
Mhm.
Moving on to the mentionables. This one's a little sad, and
Yeah.
I'm glad you put it on somewhere because it was on my mind. But yeah, why don't you take it away?
Yeah. So I'm not going to get too in the weeds as far as like the circumstances around this happening. You can go and read about it, but Ed Piskor, one of my favorite comic book writers and artists, um, committed suicide last week, and it was done as sort of I don't know, I think he was in a place in his life where he didn't see any way forward, because this guy was basically, his career was on the up trajectory, where he had just signed a $75,000 deal with an art gallery in Philadelphia, and he had just gotten a new comic book deal, and he had a very successful YouTube channel, and essentially all that stuff disappeared overnight for him. And you can go read about why exactly that happened, but essentially I think he saw no way forward, and yeah, he committed suicide. And it's, if you want a dose of like morbid reality, you can go read his suicide note. It's still up on Facebook, and it is pretty fucked.
It's rough.
And so,
it's a rough
yeah,
one.
Yeah, and so, but to kind of move on from that, I just want to celebrate the guy. He was one of the few like true comic book scholars. His YouTube channel that he did with Jim Rugg, it's called Cartoonist Kayfabe, is still up, and it's actually, they're still putting out videos from their backlog.
Wow.
And it's pretty crazy. Yeah, there are still new videos going up, because they had a Patreon that they put videos up first, and then they transferred all that stuff over to YouTube on sort of a delayed basis. So yeah, there's still new videos going up. They're incredible YouTube channel. Him and Jim Rugg really like get into the nitty gritty. They know their shit. And so, but in addition to that, I will say that his most recent comic book series, it's called Red Room. It's all about the making of snuff films, was incredible. I read the whole thing. I have the whole thing on floppies, and really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, that's my mentionable. Cartoonist Kayfabe and Red Room, and celebrate the life of Ed Piskor.
Definitely. I really want to read Grand Design, because I hadn't heard about it until he passed away. Yeah, definitely. A hard thing to go through, and we'll just, since we didn't trigger warning it, it's just like, know the suicide hotline if you genuinely are, finding yourself ideating. But something more positive for me. During my appendix convalescence, I also entertained myself through a mobile game called Cats in Soup, which I didn't know this. I wish I had known this. Has a Netflix component that lets you bypass all the ads and you get everything for fucking free. I just found that out as I was getting clips for this. Because otherwise you have to watch ads, which are entertaining in a very bizarre way, because they're so like mind-numbing and they have a weird like lore to them. I'm going to talk about that another time. But in this game, you just cats fall from the sky from stars, and then they start doing jobs for you. One makes soup, one blends juice, another has like a wok that they're grilling vegetables in, and others are chopping the vegetables. And every time you get something, you hit it, and then you get money, and you use that money to level things up. You can build new things in your cat restaurant village that you have in the woods, and then you can do other things, like give them fun things to do, like jump on a trampoline or take a nap, plant some wildflowers, and then you can level up your recipes that way. If it didn't have great aesthetics, if the music wasn't relaxing and chill, I am not one to do mobile games, but this is one that for some reason I found myself doing. And Angie introduced it to me, and she has since like completely dropped it. And I still load it up every day, at least 2 or 3 times, just to keep moving things along. But I probably need to uninstall it and do something more productive with my time. But that's
I always like a nice idle game. I think that's what this is, right? It's an idle cat game. Yeah. So yeah, idle games can be very, very enticing. So yeah, that's and yeah, we spent an entire segment of this episode shitting on Netflix. So I will say, to give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt, if you have Netflix on your phone, go check out the games section of Netflix, because they do give a lot of good games for free.
They do. They really do. November just gave me a Play-Doh ring. Isn't that cool?
Oh, nice.
On my middle finger. And I just want to shout out Andy No, getting like 2 seconds of like one of his Antifa videos into Civil War, and thereby pissing off a whole bunch of people who now think this is a right-wing film. which is just the absurdity of our times. But definitely, is it? I'll ask you this: did you see it in IMAX?
No, I did not. No,
Okay.
I have a feeling it's not worth it because I not to get too much into the weeds at the end of our show, but basically there are movies that are filmed for IMAX, and then there are movies that they just throw on IMAX willy-nilly, and this is the latter. This movie
Okay.
was not filmed with IMAX cameras. It was not made for IMAX like a Christopher Nolan movie. So yeah, don't spend the money.
It's driving a Lamborghini down a dirt road. You just don't do that.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you made it all the way to this little tag here. And we'll be back next week with a mini-sode from Matt. What are you going to be talking about?
So I'm going to be talking about how much I think Amazon is mishandling the MGM Studios properties, because it's been a couple years now since they bought them. And boy, howdy, they are not doing anything with any of those properties. So that'll be what that mini-sode will be about.
Right on. And then the following week, God willing, we're going to be reviewing Challengers, the latest Zendaya Luca Guadagnino collaboration. And the Play-Doh ring, I took it off. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
But on that note, everybody, we'll say goodbye. Thanks, Matt.
Yep. See ya.